Durango, Colorado, this is Democracy Now!
For us, it's actually Indigenous Peoples Day, and for the Taino people, who were the first indigenous peoples in the Western Hemisphere to be contacted by Columbus, to be impacted by the colonial machine that was set in motion after that initial contact. We're here to say that Columbus is not a day. We're here to join with other people's voices in saying there needs to be an end to this cycle of colonialism and greed.
Reconsider Columbus Day. As the nation commemorates the arrival of Christopher Columbus to the so-called New World in 1492, students and professors at Fort Lewis College here in Durango, Colorado, are pushing for the teaching of the real history of the Americas. We'll be joined by a roundtable. Then Dennis Banks, the legendary Native American activist and co-founder of the American Indian Movement.
There's a complete massacre of an entire village and community and human beings. Whole tribes were wiped out. So that's how I view genocide.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're on the road at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez has won his fourth presidential election, defeating challenger Enrique Capriles. Chavez took 54% of the vote to Capriles' 45%, in a race widely seen as Chavez's strongest challenge since his first victory in 1998. At a victory rally outside the presidential palace, Chavez reached out to the political opposition and called for unity among Venezuelans.
I send my words of recognition to all of those who voted against us. I send out a special recognition for your democratic talent, for your participation, for the civic demonstration that you have given today, despite not agreeing with the Bolivarian proposition. I invite you to dialogue, to debate, and to the joint work for a Bolivarian Venezuela.
In his concession speech later in the night, Capriles urged Chavez to recognize the voices of those who voted against him.
I hope a political movement that has been in power for 14 years understands that almost half the country does not agree with it. I ask those who remain in power for respect, consideration, and recognition of almost half the country.
Thousands of protesters marched in Pakistan over the weekend to protest the ongoing U.S. drone strikes. On Sunday, the Pakistani government blocked the march from entering the tribal area of Waziristan, a frequent target of drone attacks. Addressing the march, Pakistani political leader Imran Khan said the drone strikes are fostering hatred of the United States.
These drone attacks are a violation of international law. These drone attacks are a violation of the human rights of the Pakistani people. Do we all condemn them? We want to send a message to America. The more drone attacks you carry out, the more the people will grow to hate you and raise their arms against you. Our tribal people will not be scared off with drone attacks.
More than 30 U.S. citizens with the group Code Pink traveled to Pakistan to take part in the march and meet with drone strike victims.
The illegal, immoral, brutal attacks on the innocent people of Waziristan and the Fatah region of Pakistan must end now. These are illegal drone strikes carried out by a CIA. CIA is a civilian organization using military equipment. This is a war crime.
They're illegal. They're against international law. They invade the sovereignty of Pakistan, and they're not productive.
In a U.S. protest held in solidarity with the march in Pakistan, 10 people were arrested Friday at the Hancock Field Air National Guard base in upstate New York. Members of the Upstate Coalition to Ground the Drones and End the War stood in front of the base's gate, holding signs and blocking entry. Shortly before he was arrested, protester Jack Gilroy said demonstrators hope to hold up the piloting of the drones that takes place at the base, perhaps sparing the lives of civilians overseas, he said.
We're hoping that by being here, maybe we're going to hold up one of these pilots for an hour or two, and that perhaps may be idealistically saving a family from being destroyed in Pakistan or somewhere else.
New job figures released Friday show the U.S. unemployment rate has fallen to 7.8%, the lowest point since President Obama took office. Employers added 114,000 workers in September, and revised figures showed employment gains in previous months were higher than previously thought. The number marked a boost to President Obama's re-election bid in the aftermath of his widely criticized debate performance last week. Addressing supporters at the University of Virginia, President Obama said the country has come too far to turn back.
More people are getting jobs. Now, every month reminds us that we've still got too many of our friends and neighbors who are looking for work. And there are too many middle-class families that are still struggling to pay the bills. They were struggling long before the crisis hit. But today's news certainly is not an excuse to try to talk down the economy to score a few political points. It's a reminder that this country has come too far to turn back now.
Also campaigning in Virginia, Republican challenger Mitt Romney downplayed the new figures.
This can't go on. I'll tell you this. When I'm president of the United States, that unemployment rate is going to come down, not because people are giving up and dropping out of the workforce, but because we're creating more jobs. I will create jobs and get America working again.
President Obama's re-election campaign, meanwhile, has announced it took in a record $181 million in September, its largest monthly total to date. The vast majority came from donations of $250 or less. At a fundraiser in Los Angeles Sunday, President Obama mocked Romney for vowing to cut funding to PBS.
When he was asked what he'd actually do to cut spending, he said he'd go after public television. So for all you moms and kids out there, don't worry. Somebody's finally cracking down on Big Bird. Cracking down on him. Elmo's made a run for the border. Governor Romney plans to let Wall Street run wild again, but he's bringing the hammer down on Sesame Street.
5 alleged backers of al-Qaeda have been extradited to the United States from Britain after long-running legal battles. Muslim cleric Abu Hamza al-Masri and 4 others arrived Saturday after the European Court of Human Rights rejected their appeals. Al-Masri spent years in prison in Britain on a conviction of inciting racial hatred and soliciting murder. A federal grand jury indicted him in 2004 on allegations of supporting al-Qaeda and aiding a fatal kidnapping in Yemen. His lawyers had appealed his extradition to the U.S. by citing European statutes barring inhumane and degrading treatment. 2 others were arrested after the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings in North Africa and had fought extradition since. The other 2 have been indicted on charges of supplying material to Islamic militants in Chechnya and to the Taliban. One of those 2, Babar Ahmad, is a British citizen. His supporters have long waged a campaign criticizing the U.S.-Britain extradition treaty and calling for him to be tried on British soil. Violence is raging in cities across Syria as rebel fighters clash with the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Syrian activists say Assad's forces have stepped up attacks in Homs, which has seen heavy fighting over the course of a 4-month siege. Aerial and ground attacks reported on Aleppo, while a bombing at the police headquarters in Damascus has led one officer dead. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in cities across Spain Sunday in the latest national protest against government-imposed austerity. Union leaders have warned of a potential general strike should the Spanish government continue to slash public spending. Thousands of people have rallied in Guatemala over the killings of 6 indigenous protesters who were shot dead last week. The victims were taking part in a road blockade to oppose living costs and educational policies when government forces opened fire. Another 34 people were wounded. Thousands of workers staged a one-day strike Friday at the Foxconn factory in China, known for poorly treating workers who help make Apple products such as the iPhone. The group China Labor Watch says up to 4,000 Foxconn workers walked off the job in protest of new employee demands, including working through a holiday that began last week. Foxconn initially denied that a strike was taking place, but later said the dispute had been resolved. Workers at a Walmart supply warehouse in Elwood, Illinois, are returning to work after a 3-week strike. The workers walked off the job last month amidst allegations of sexual harassment, dangerous working conditions, unpaid wages, and retaliation against organizers. Managers reportedly fired several leaders and threatened others after they delivered a petition. The workers say they've won pledges to end workplace retaliation and will be given their full wages for the time they were on strike. The strike in Illinois was followed by similar actions at Walmart supply warehouses in California and Florida by workers demanding fairer workplace conditions. A Buffalo man has won the right to sue the manufacturer, distributor, and dealer of the pistol used to shoot him nearly a decade ago. Daniel Williams was a high school basketball star when he was shot and badly wounded in 2003. On Friday, a New York State court ruled Williams can take legal action against the Ohio-based weapons manufacturer B. Miller and distributor MKS Supply for knowingly selling weapons to irresponsible dealers. The dealer who purchased the guns in Williams' case is a convicted felon who was barred from buying weapons. In a statement, the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence said, quote, "This important ruling states gun companies who choose to supply the criminal gun market are not above the law. When the gun industry places profits over people, they should and must be held accountable to the innocent victims." And an unarmed 22-year-old Hispanic-American man has been shot dead by New York City police. Noel Polanco was driving on the Grand Central Parkway in Queens when police approached him at a traffic stop. Police say Polanco was shot after reaching for something in his vehicle. But a witness says his hands remained on the steering wheel the entire time. Polanco was an Army National Guardsman who'd hoped to one day join the police force. He was traveling with an off-duty police officer when he was killed. On Sunday, dozens of people rallied outside New York police headquarters to protest the shooting of another unarmed person of color, Mohammed Ba, who was shot dead inside his Harlem apartment last month after reportedly lunging at police with a knife. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I am Amy Goodman. We are broadcasting today from Fort Lewis College. Today marks Columbus Day, a federal holiday to commemorate the arrival of Christopher Columbus to the so-called New World in 1492. But the holiday has long evoked sadness and anger amongst people of color, especially Native Americans, who object to honoring a man who opened the door to European colonization, the exploitation of Native peoples, and the slave trade. Instead, they're calling people to reconsider Columbus Day by acknowledging the genocide of indigenous peoples and celebrating Native American traditions.
Columbus Day.
A day that our government has deemed worthy of remembrance.
But with all due respect. With all due respect.
With all due respect.
There's an ugly truth that has been overlooked
for way too long.
Columbus committed heinous crimes
against the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean
and millions of natives throughout the Americas. And Columbus set the stage for the slave trade in the New World.
So please reconsider if this is a man you want to honor.
Reconsider if you want to celebrate the crimes of Columbus.
It's not your fault. It happened a long time ago.
but remaining neutral
and pretending like it didn't happen,
or that it doesn't still impact us today.
So please
take the day to learn the whole story.
We are broadcasting today from Fort Lewis College here in Durango, Colorado. The community is reclaiming Columbus Day, turning it into a day to celebrate indigenous peoples' cultures, language, music, and other traditions, holding a real history of the America's Day. Fort Lewis College was once a military fort, later turned into an Indian boarding school, then turned state public school. Due to a century-old promise made by the state of Colorado, the college waives the tuition costs for all its Native American students. Today, the college awards approximately 16% of the baccalaureate degrees earned by Native American students in the United States. The waiver has changed the lives of thousands of Native American students and in many ways has come to define the college, but it's now being challenged at a time of state budget constraints. Fort Lewis College graduates more Native Americans than any four-year college in the United States. We're joined now by three guests involved with the real history of America's Day. Esther Bullen is a writing instructor here at Fort Lewis College and a member of the Navajo Nation, as well as an indigenous activist, a poet. She won the American Book Award for her book of poetry. Sharina Trujillo Long is coordinator of El Centro de Muchos Colores at Fort Lewis College and chair of the Real History of the Americas Committee. And we're joined by Noel Genevieve Altaha, a student coordinator for today's events, a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe, and a senior here at Fort Lewis College, majoring in psychology, minoring in Native American and Indigenous Studies. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Let's begin with Sharina Trujillo Long. Talk about this day, how you're trying to reframe Columbus Day.
Sure. This day here at Fort Lewis College is very unique because we really have so many vibrant tribes and vibrant people still living after Columbus Day's 1492 sailed the ocean blue that we were always taught. We still have people living, and we celebrate the beautiful things that they have to offer. Here on campus, we've done it for the last 4 years, and it really started because we wanted to do something different on Columbus Day. We didn't need to have the day off to celebrate him and his discoveries. We wanted to celebrate what we still have.
What does it mean to say Christopher Columbus discovered the New World?
Very hurtful for many, many people. That is very hurtful to say, that we were discovered. I am not Native American myself, but have lived in this region in the Four Corners for my whole life, and am half Hispana and half white. And so the stories that I was always told was very clear in school, who discovered who. And it wasn't really until I was a student here at Fort Lewis College also that I saw a different story, and I wanted to be able to share that with others, and that's why we started today.
Noel Altaha, you're a senior. You're a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe. Where is your family from in the United States?
So we're from the Fort Apache Indian Reservation in White River, Arizona, and before there were state lines and borders, my people came from the Whitewater area, so it's part of my clan and it's part of my identity, and that's where they still are today.
You're one of the major organizers of this day of events. What are you trying to convey? For people who are saying, what are you talking about? Christopher Columbus came and he discovered America. Tell a different story to us today.
Well, Amy, I'm just here to share where I come from. And in my tribe, it's really important to use your words wisely and to, there's a saying, Nijat Hayu, and that's Where are your ears, my grandma would say, and it's really important to listen more than talk. Creator gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, to listen, because listening is more important than talking sometimes. And I was talking to my grandfather this morning, and I said, Shawistine, I'm talking to Amy Goodman. And he's like, who? I said, Amy Goodman. Oh, what tribe is she? And, but you do come from a tribe, and that's really important. You know, your ancestors came, and we all come from a people, and that's part of our identity. And so my job is just to be the vessel that allows others, those peoples that their stories were hidden and erased and silenced on this one day, to share and embrace that.
Esther Belin, you're with the Navajo Nation. You're a writing instructor here, an acclaimed poet. Talk about this day's meaning in your community and how the rest of people in the United States talk about it as a federal holiday, Columbus Day.
You know, I'd have to kind of align with Noel in terms of how we individually look at this day. You know, you definitely can embrace the pain and the genocide that has been our history and our foundation. And that is definitely a valid emotion, a valid, you know, almost reaction for Indigenous people. And I think as you grow in awareness and maturity and are given opportunities to present, we have to go beyond that. And what I mean by that, individually, we all go through our own healing. We don't have a healing process in this country called the United States. There is no platform, no medium, no expectation of that. And, you know, as tribal people, that's been part of our worldview. You know, just like Noel said, where, you know, we see everyone as coming from a tribe, whether they acknowledge it or not. And it's super important for us to start that healing process, and then as well to talk about it and to guide other people around their own trauma, which it is an historical trauma. It's legitimate, and it is as valid as the pain where some people have no idea where it came from. And that discovery is, you know, to give articulation to that is so powerful. It's so emotional. And, you know, as I use the English language, I see myself as an interpreter. I have been chosen this route. I have been chosen for this time to use that language to speak for others that are in, you know, a void or in a trauma that they have no articulation yet. And I think that is the major reason I've been involved in this event, because we get to celebrate those articulations. We get to celebrate that pain and legitimize it as real. And whether, you know, we can include everybody or not, we definitely have that emotion. We know that more are coming to support.
We're talking with Esther Belin, who is of the Navajo Nation, Noel Altahau, White Mountain Apache, and Sharina Trujillo Long, Hispana, as she says, here in Fort Lewis College in Durango, which is celebrating a Day of the Americas today. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.
Indian legislation's on the desk of a do-right congressman. Now, he don't know much about the issue, so he picks up the phone and he asks advice of the senator out in Indian country, a darling of the energy companies who are ripping off what's left of the reservations. I learned a safety rule. I don't know who to thank. Don't stand between the reservation and the corporate bank. They'll send in front
is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, and we are broadcasting from Fort Lewis College. Fort Lewis College in the Four Corners in southwest Colorado as we continue our 100-city tour. Tonight we'll be at Mancus Opera House. Tomorrow and this afternoon at noon we'll be in Moab, Utah, and then we'll be back here in Durango. Fort Lewis College graduates more Native Americans than any four-year college in the United States. It is actually a non-tribal college. And we're joined by three of the members of this community, two of whom have organized Real History of the Americas Alternative Day of Events today. We're joined by Sharina. We are joined by Sharina Long Trujillo, who is one of the longtime organizers of this. We are also joined by Noelle Genevieve Altaha, who is a senior here at Fort Lewis College, very active in today's events, and Esther Boleyn, who is an instructor of writing and a member of the Navajo Nation. Esther, I was wondering if you could read from your poetry, From the Belly of the Beast.
Amy, most people do.
I said it wrong.
Mispronounce it. And, you know, I've been questioned about my title many times, and it's From the Belly of My Beauty. And the title really stems from this idea of not only our ceremony called the Beauty Way from the Navajo, but that idea, again, of all these words were, you know, circulating inside of me in terms of, you know, wind and moisture and breath. And when they came out, I wanted them to be a contribution and not take away from our ideas, I guess, of what our people are. And so I'm going to read an excerpt of a piece. I graduated from the University of California at Berkeley as an undergrad, and I was asked to present the senior speech. And, you know, I had no idea what I was going to say because I was really conflicted most of my undergrad years in terms of what my presence was at the university as an Indigenous student, seeing how most of my family was, you know, living in poverty, and even my own mother was, you know, working two jobs. And I thought, what am I doing here? And why are people paying me to read books? And so this is part of that. Surviving in this place called the United States is possible. Impossible for those who take it seriously. If I were Japanese, I would be a Nisei. I am second generation off reservation. My mother comes from the land of enchantment, now also the land of poverty, drugs, illiteracy, and confusion. My mother, like many Japanese during World War II, was relocated off the res to a federally run boarding school in Riverside, California, USA. My mother resides still, angelic, among yellow-brown haze, indigenous and immigrant smog in Los Angeles, skyscraping progress, pushing her home. I'm sure when you were young, your history books told you all about Indians. Or, I'm sure when you were young, you saw Indians on TV. You saw me on TV. Indian princess, rotund squaw, bloodthirsty brave, stoic chief, ungrateful drunk. Now, I'm sure when you were young, your fifth grade teacher couldn't tell you why. Men worked on cars and built airplanes and school buses. Men drank beer and played pool. They had friends named Buffalo Joe and Harold Jim. They laughed a lot and yelled a lot and called white men chicken shit. Men stayed at bars all weekend and wore dark glasses and sat in the back at church. Their shame silenced and their anger roared you into an arroyo, safe from them. And you didn't want to be like them, or know anyone like them, or love anyone like them again. When I was young, I saw men as father. As a grown woman, I see my father in me, become me, sitting in a bar, silencing the war cry of my mothers corralled at Bosque Redondo, numbing the wound deep in my valley of cowboy and Indians, recycling the memory of cold mountain fever.
Esther Boleyn reading from her poetry book, From the Belly of My Beauty. Esther, if you can talk about what it meant to grow up, as you say, off-res, and what it means to live on the reservation, which you go back and visit.
Oh, yeah. So I'm a byproduct of the federal relocation and termination era in this country. And so I grew up, really living in two worlds in the LA area, and embraced every bit of that culture, which was, I lived in a I guess, a poor neighborhood, but always knowing that we had that connection, right? My parents spoke Navajo, and we ate Navajo food, and our worldview really was that Navajo worldview in terms of just our placement in school. Our mom trained us from day one. When you walk out that door, people will be against you. They'll be against your thoughts. They'll be against your worldview. You really have to be prepared, because they're going to challenge things about your who you are. And you need to know the other side in order to survive, because she and my father both had really traumatic experiences in boarding school. And, and that was day one, what she taught us.
And those experiences were in boarding school?
Yes.
In boarding school, what were those experiences?
Oh.
Explain the Indian boarding school system in this country.
For her, my mom, always considers herself lucky in that she went to a boarding school with her sisters. And so at night, after dark, they would talk to each other and comfort each other. But during the day, they were isolated, and they were forced to, and ridiculed, traumatized around the English language. And that idea I said earlier about articulation, of course it's so hard for tribal people to articulate that. When somebody yelling and forcing you to be creative or have a say, and you don't have any grasp of the language or the context. And so, she was...
The boarding school saying you could not speak in Navajo.
Yeah, you could not speak your language, and they forced you to speak the English language. And, they forced her to choose a name. And, for a while they thought my mom had tuberculosis, so she was isolated for almost a year, and she never had tuberculosis. And so just all these traumas to her and her identity, thinking that something is wrong, and that the way they cook is wrong, and the foods they like, and they had to eat those foods. My mom still can't eat mayonnaise to this day because it just makes her sick. They made them eat the condiments, and learned how to vacuum and set tables, and be proper young women and it was in the 50s era. That's where she went.
Noel Altaha, you went to an Indian boarding school in Salem, Oregon?
I did. I went to Chamawa Indian High School. And my time in boarding school was not of the traumatic experiences of my family. My parents and my grandparents went to boarding school, and my grandfather used to run away. And the Fort Apache Indian Reservation had a boarding school too. My mom went to a foster home. But my time in boarding school, I remember walking across campus and hearing Pimas talk their language, and then walking to class and hearing Chippewas talk and I was like, what is that? And that's their native tongue. But when I was 6, my mom took me to Oklahoma City, and I spoke Apache pretty much before I spoke English. But I remember being traumatized when I was 6, and my teacher laughed at me because I didn't know that the rest of the world called an apple an apple. To me, it was masana. And it was so funny to me that English is so backwards to the rest of the languages that I feel makes sense. So when Esther Berlin talks about that trauma, it may have not happened to me personally, but I still feel it collectively. And Esther Berlin talks about that, I am because we are, and that really stayed with me because I can't speak for all Native peoples, but I can speak on behalf of my experiences and those of the stories that other people share with me. So,
can you share a message to people who are listening and watching this broadcast now in Apache?
Very proudly.
Dagot Shin Wal Tomanze Shema J. Velasquez Winze.
And tell us what it means.
Basically, I just introduced myself in my native tongue, and sometimes in English there are no words to express what it means to be Inde. We don't call ourselves Apache, we call ourselves Inde, the people. And what that means is we come from this land, we come from this area, we come from the animals and the earth, and we come from each other. And so when you come from a people, you learn about respect. And that sometimes is limited in the English language. You know, sometimes you have to express it in a ceremony. You have to express it by showing compassion, by dancing, by singing, by just being with someone and listening more than speaking.
Shirina, as a Hispana, how do you relate to this area of a tremendous diversity of culture and this program that you helped to establish here at Fort Lewis College on this day that others observe as Columbus Day?
As a Hispano-Americana, so I would be I'm half Hispanic. I'm what in this region of the Southwest we would call coyotes, not the coyotes smuggling people on the borders, but the coyotes that are half and half of two different cultures. So when Esther speaks about living in two worlds, the two worlds that I live in personally, my experience has been very German-American, my mother's side, Shank, Prouty, and then very Hispano-American, right here from this region. We have a saying in this area about the border didn't cross us. You know, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And so that's sort of, in this region, how we look at a lot of the history of the area. The way that this event speaks to me it feels so good, even just in this short time, to talk about it. What we're doing is giving voice to the unvoiced, and it is about looking at your own story, how you fit in the puzzle, and that's what this event has helped me do, and we're helping others do as well.
And Esther Berlin, a message in Navajo.
And I'll do an introduction as well. She'e Esther Berlin Yenisha Kloge Dene Neshlan Tura Chitni Bashis Chin Kitla Chitni Dashache. And for us, when we do even our basic introduction, it is, we acknowledge all of our grandparents. And so for me, I'm related to people in my mother's clan. That's who I adopt. And then through my father, I'm a sort of a distant relative to them. And then I acknowledge my grandparents. We're matrilineal, so it goes through the mother. So we have 4 clans. That's how we know, and we sort of position ourselves within our community. And you know, clans are known for different things. And for me, my clan is one of an adopted clan where, you know, there's 2 different stories I've heard, but one of them is that one of our major chief, Manuelito, his wife as they were traveling to and from Santa Fe, many times they would stop at different Indian pueblos, Pueblo tribes on the way, and one of them was the Zia Pueblo. And they would always bring stuff to trade, blankets or corn or whatever, in terms of harvest. And the Zia tribe adopted Chief Manuelito's wife, Juanita. And so she was the first Clogue from that area. And so we're descendants of her, so we're, and that makes sense because we're part of the checkerboard region on the eastern side of the Navajo Reservation.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us. Esther Belin read from the belly of My Beauty, her book of poetry, and she teaches writing here at Fort Lewis College in Durango. She was also joined by Sharina Trujillo Long, who is one of those who has established this special day called Real Histories of the Americas. And I want to also thank our final guest, Noelle Altaha, a student coordinator for Real History of the Americas Day here at Fort Lewis College. She's a senior majoring in psychology and minoring in Native American studies. When we come back, we'll be joined by Dennis Banks. He's joining us from New York, where he was attending the Russell Tribunal on Palestine. This is Democracy Now! On this day that some call Columbus Day, others talk about in a different way, wanting to bring out the real history of the Americas. Stay with us.
I never saw so many business suits. Never knew a dollar sign could look so cute. Never knew a junkie with a money Jones. They singing, who's selling Park Place? Who's buying Boardwalk? These old men, they make their dirty deals. Go in the back room and see what they can steal. Talk about your beautiful but spacious skies. It's about uranium. It's about the water rights. Got Mother Nature on a luncheon plate. They carve her up and call it real estate. Want all the resources and all of the land. They make a war over it. War brings up for it. The reservation out at Poverty Row. There's something cooking and the lights are low. Somebody's trying to save our Mother Earth. I'm gonna help them to save it and sing it and pay it, sing it. Oh, no, guess you can't do that. No, guess you can't do that.
No, no, Keshe Gesh by Buffy St. Marie, Native American singer. This is Democracy Now!